It's the year 1250. You're standing on the banks of the Mississippi River, just across from modern-day St. Louis. And rising in front of you is a city. A massive, sprawling metropolis. Bigger than London at the time. Bigger than Paris. But here's what makes this impossible. This is North America. We're told that before Europeans arrived, North America was mostly scattered tribes and villages, small groups, simple societies. That's a lie. What you're looking at right now, 20,000 people, massive earthen pyramids, one of them 10 stories tall, plazas that could hold thousands, an astronomical observatory that rivals Stonehenge. This is Cahokia, and for 400 years, it was the beating heart of a civilization that controlled hundreds of thousands of square miles. Then, pause, it vanished. The Mississippian culture emerged around 700 CE in the Mississippi River Valley. But they weren't starting from scratch. These people built on thousands of years of indigenous knowledge, mound building traditions that stretch back to 3400 BCE. Here's what's incredible. Between 700 and 1600 CE, they created the most complex society north of Mexico. We're talking centralized governments, organized religion, massive public works projects, long-distance trade networks spanning from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. And the center of it all? Cahokia. By 1050 CE, Cahokia wasn't just a city. It was the city, the largest urban center in what would become the United States. A record it held until Philadelphia surpassed it in the 1780s. Think about that for a second. For 700 years after Cahokia's peak, no American city was bigger. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the pyramid, Monk's Mound. When you stand at the base of this thing, craning your neck to see the top, you're looking at the largest earthwork in North America, period. How big are we talking? 100 feet tall. That's a 10-story building. The base covers 14 acres. That's bigger than the base of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And here's the thing that blows my mind. They built it with baskets. No wheels, no metal tools, no beasts of burden. Just human hands, woven baskets, and an estimated 55 million cubic feet of earth. Do the math. If a single basket holds 1 cubic foot of soil, that's 55 million trips up that mound. Construction began around 900 CE and continued in stages for 300 years. Archaeologists estimate it took thousands of workers and hundreds of thousands of man-hours. But why? Because this wasn't just a building. This was power made visible. At the top, the chief's residence and the main temple. From up there, the ruler could see the entire city spread out below. 80 square miles of houses, plazas, and smaller mounts. And everyone below, they could see him. The message was clear. I stand between you and the gods. I control the sun. I bring the crops. I am the connection between earth and heaven. This was political theater on a monumental scale. Imagine you're a worker in 1000 CE. You wake before dawn, grab your basket, woven from river cane, walk to the designated earth quarry, fill your basket with 50 pounds of soil, carry it a quarter mile to the mound, climb the ramp, dump it, walk back down. Again, and again, and again. For months, maybe years.
Some archaeologists think the workers were rotated in, villages from across the region sending teams as tribute or religious bibi, or others think they were fed and housed by the city, working in exchange for food. Either way, this was organized labor on a scale North America wouldn't see again until the Industrial Revolution.
300 feet west of Monk's Mound stood one of the most sophisticated astronomical observatories in the ancient world. The Mississippians called it, well, we don't know what they called it. Archaeologists call it Woodhenge, and it's proof that these people understood the cosmos better than most civilizations of their time. Picture a perfect circle, 410 feet in diameter. That's bigger than a football field. Around the perimeter, 48 massive red cedar posts, each one 2 feet thick and 20 feet tall. And in the exact center of the circle, a single observation post. Now, here's where it gets wild. If you stand at that center post on the morning of the spring equinox, March 20th, and look east, pause. The sun rises exactly over one of the posts. Summer solstice, different post, exact alignment. Winter solstice, another post, perfect. Fall equinox, you guessed it. We're not talking about rough approximations here. These alignments are precise. We're talking about people who trap the sun's movement across the sky with an accuracy of less than 1 degree. Why? Because your survival depended on it. You need to know exactly when to plant corn. Too early? Late frost kills the seedlings. Too late? Early frost kills the harvest. Get it wrong and thousands of people starve. But if you can predict the seasons down to the day, pause. You become indispensable, divine, the person who commands the sun itself. Here's the crazy part. For hundreds of years, archaeologists had no idea Woodhenge existed. Why? Pause. Because wood rots. By the time Europeans arrived, there was nothing left, just flat ground. It wasn't until 1961 that archaeologist Warren Witry discovered dark circular stains in the soil during excavations. Post holes, dozens of them, arranged in perfect circles. He mapped them, ran the calculations, and realized, pause, holy crap, this is an astronomical observatory. Since then, they found evidence of 5 Woodhenges at Cahokia, built and rebuilt between 900 and 1100 CE. Each one slightly different, each one more refined. These people were scientists. Now, let's walk into the city itself, past the wooden palisade walls, 12 feet high, reinforced with watchtowers every 70 feet, through the gates, and into the grand plaza. 50 acres of open space. That's 40 football fields. Completely flat, not a single blade of grass out of place. The surface packed so hard from thousands of feet that even today, 900 years later, grass barely grows there. This was the beating heart of Cahokia. On any given day, thousands of people filled this plaza. Traders from 500 miles away, bringing copper from Lake Superior, shells from the Gulf of Mexico, obsidian from the Rockies. Religious ceremonies, Chunkey games, political announcements, but 4 times a year. During the solstices and equinoxes, this place transformed. The great gatherings. Imagine you're here during the spring equinox ceremony. Sunrise. The chief priest stands atop Monk's Mound, visible to everyone below. Behind him, the sun rises perfectly aligned with Woodhenge. Down in the plaza,
20,000 people, all watching, all believing. Drums echo off the mounds, dancers in elaborate feathered regalia move in precise formations. Smoke from secret fires rises into the morning sky. This isn't just religion, this is state power. But the plaza wasn't just for ceremonies. This was also where they played Chunkey. Never heard of it? Don't worry. It was the most popular game in Mississippian culture for 800 years. Here's how it worked. You take a stone disc, perfectly round, about the size of a hockey puck. Roll it across the plaza at high speed. Then 2 players throw 8-foot spears, trying to land them where they think the disc will stop rolling. Closest spear wins. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. This game required insane skill, split-second timing, the ability to predict physics and trajectory while running at full speed. People bet everything on Chunkey games: houses, food, jewelry, even family members. Spanish explorers in the 1500s wrote about indigenous people so addicted to Chunkey, they'd gamble away everything they owned and then kill themselves in shame. That's how serious this game was. Here's something we don't like to talk about when we romanticize ancient cultures. Cahokia was not an egalitarian society. This was a rigid class system, and if you were born at the bottom, you stayed at the bottom. At the very top, the paramount chief and his immediate family. These people lived on top of Monk's Mound. They wore elaborate copper ornaments, shell bead necklaces, and feathered capes that took months to create. They ate the best food, lived in the biggest houses. And when they died, they were buried with hundreds of sacrificial offerings. Below them, the elite class, lesser chiefs, priests, warriors, and craftsmen. These folks lived in houses surrounding the central plaza inside the palisade walls. They had access to luxury goods, political power, status. Then you had the commoners, farmers mostly. They lived outside the palisade walls, in small, thatched roof houses, worked the fields from sunrise to sunset, gave a portion of their harvest as tribute. And at the very bottom, slaves. Let's not sugarcoat this. The Mississippian culture practiced slavery. Prisoners of war, debtors, people from conquered villages. And the archaeological evidence shows something even darker: human sacrifice. In 1967, archaeologists excavating Mound 72, a burial mound south of Monk's Mound, found something horrifying. 272 bodies, mostly young women between the ages of 15 and 25. Many showed signs of being strangled or having their throats cut. They were arranged in layers, carefully placed. This wasn't a massacre or a mass grave from disease. This was ritual killing. Here's what archaeologists think happened. A paramount chief died around 1000 CE. To honor him in the afterlife, they buried him on a platform made of 20,000 shell beads arranged in the shape of a falcon, the symbol of warfare and the sun. Around him, luxury goods, copper, mica, arrows with perfect stone points that were never meant to be used, just to show wealth. And then, they killed over 200 people to serve him in the afterlife. Mostly young women, some men, 4 men with their heads and hands cut off. This wasn't just burial. This was a demonstration of absolute power. The message, this ruler is so important that hundreds of people die when he does. But if you were elite, life was pretty good. You lived in a house 4 times the size of a commoner's. Wooden walls, thatched roof, multiple rooms. You ate venison and fish, turkey, and fresh corn. Not the limited diet of beans and squash that commoners survived on. You wore jewelry made from materials brought from 1,000 miles away. And you had time. time to play Chunkey, time to participate in ceremonies, time to create art.
Let's talk about the thing that made all of this possible: food. Because you can't build pyramids, astronomical observatories, and massive plazas if everyone's struggling to eat. So how did Cahokia feed 20,000 people? First, location. Cahokia sits in the American Bottom, a floodplain along the Mississippi River that's considered some of the most fertile land in North America. Every spring, the Mississippi flooded, and when the water receded, it left behind rich black soil loaded with nutrients. This was perfect for farming. But the Mississippians didn't just rely on luck. They engineered their agriculture. The Three Sisters. Their main crops? Corn, beans, and squash. The Three Sisters, as many indigenous cultures called them. And they weren't grown together by accident. This was brilliant ecological engineering. Here's how it worked. You plant corn first. It grows tall, up to 8 feet. Then you plant beans at the base of the corn stalks. The beans climb up the corn, using it as a natural trellis. And the beans, they fix nitrogen in the soil. That means they pull nitrogen from the air and convert it into a form that feeds the corn. Then you plant squash at the base. Its huge leaves spread out, shading the soil, which keeps moisture in and weeds out. 3 crops, 1 plot, all helping each other grow. This system could support populations that would have been impossible otherwise. But here's the problem. 20,000 people eat a lot of food. We're talking about 3 million pounds of corn per year. How do you manage that? Storage. The Mississippians built massive granaries, elevated structures to keep grain dry and away from rodents. Each elite family controlled their own storage, but the paramount chief, he controlled the central granary. And this is where it gets political. If there's a bad harvest and people are starving, who decides who gets the emergency reserves? The chief. This gave him enormous power. He literally controlled life and death through food distribution. But they didn't live on corn alone. The Mississippi River was loaded with fish. Catfish as big as humans, sturgeon 6 feet long. They built fish weirs, underwater fence traps that funneled fish into baskets. And hunting, deer, turkey, migratory waterfowl by the thousands during spring and fall. Elite hunters use atlatls, spear throwers that could launch a dart with enough force to take down a deer at 50 yards. Commoners mostly use nets and traps. Your life revolved around the seasons. Spring, plant corn, beans, and squash, fish the spawning runs. Summer, weed fields, gather wild plants and berries. Fall, harvest, all hands in the fields. This was the make or break moment. Winter, hunt deer, repair tools, survive on stored food. Miss any of these timing windows, and thousands of people die. That's why Woodhenge mattered so much. That's why the chief's power was tied to his ability to control the sun. Because knowing exactly when to plant wasn't just science, it was survival. Imagine you're a trader in 1150 CE. You've just walked 600 miles from Lake Superior, carrying a pack filled with raw copper. Your feet are blistered, you've been traveling for 2 months. But when you finally see the palisade walls of Cahokia rising from the floodplain, you smile. Because you're about to get rich. Cahokia wasn't isolated, not even close. This city sat at the center of a trading network that stretched from the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic Ocean, from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico. We're talking about 1 million square miles, and goods flowed in from everywhere. Copper from Lake Superior, 1,000 miles north. Marine shells from the Gulf Coast, 800 miles south. Obsidian from Yellowstone, 1,500 miles west. Mica
from the Appalachians 600 miles east. Galena, chert, salt, exotic feathers, animal pelts. No horses, no wheels, no llamas like the Inca had. So how do you move tons of trade goods across a continent? Water. The Mississippi River was the highway of North America. Dugout canoes, some of them 40 feet long, carved from single cypress logs, could carry thousands of pounds of cargo. You could paddle downstream with the current, covering 50 miles a day. Going upstream, slower, but still faster than walking. And the Mississippi connects to dozens of tributary rivers: the Missouri, the Ohio, the Illinois. From Cahokia to the Gulf of Mexico, from Cahokia to the Great Lakes, from Cahokia to the Appalachians, all by river. Copper was huge. The Mississippians didn't just use it for decoration. They saw it as sacred, connected to the sun because of its color. Elite individuals wore copper headdresses, breastplates, and ear spools. Marine shells, especially whelk shells from the Gulf, were carved into gorgets, throat protectors, and ceremonial cups. The most famous? The Berman tablet, a carved whelk shell depicting a warrior with a mace and a severed head. This image appears at Mississippian sites from Wisconsin to Alabama. It was a symbol of power, of belonging to this culture. Mica? Thin sheets of mineral shimmering was used to create elaborate cutouts. Hands, serpents, raptors. These weren't just decorations. They were political statements. If you wore copper from a Lake Superior and a shell gorget from the Gulf, you were connected to Cahokia. You were part of the network. The Grand Plaza wasn't just for ceremonies. It was also market day. Traders set up temporary stalls, spread out their goods on woven mats, and people haggled. What was the currency? There wasn't one. This was a barter economy. You drained your surplus corn for copper, trade copper for marine shells, trade shells for obsidian blades. But some items were more valuable than others. A copper headdress? That might cost you a year's harvest. A shell gorget? Several months of labor. An obsidian blade from Yellowstone? Rare enough that only the elite could afford it. Here's what blows my mind. This network spread more than just goods. It spread ideas, religious beliefs, artistic styles, political systems, games like Chunkey. Across hundreds of Mississippian sites, from spiral mounds in Oklahoma to Etowah in Georgia to Moundville in Alabama, you see the same symbols. The cross and circle sun symbol, the weeping eye motif, the falcon warrior imagery. These weren't coincidences. This was a shared culture, a shared identity. And Cahokia was the capital.
Let's talk about what held this whole society together. Not just politics, not just trade. Pause. Religion. And at the center of Mississippian religion was a single, all-powerful deity, the sun. Archaeologists call the religious system the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex, but that's a boring name for something that dominated people's lives for 800 years. Here's what they believed. The universe was divided into 3 realms. The upper world, home of the sun, the spirits, and order. This world, where humans lived, the realm of balance. The underworld, home of chaos, darkness, and water serpents. And these 3 realms were constantly at war. The chief? He was the mediator, the one who kept balance. If the crops grew, it was because the chief maintained cosmic order. If there was drought or famine, pause. The chief had failed. The most important religious symbol was the falcon warrior,
part human, part bird of prey. Warriors who died in battle were believed to transform into falcons and fly to the upper world to serve the sun. Elite individuals were buried with falcon imagery, wings carved from copper, talon-shaped necklaces, feathered capes. Pause. This wasn't just symbolism. They believed they would become these falcon warriors in the afterlife. And here's the dark side. To maintain cosmic balance, the gods required payment. Blood. Human sacrifice wasn't common. This wasn't the Aztecs sacrificing thousands. But it happened. When a paramount chief died, retainers were killed to serve him in the afterlife. During times of crisis, drought, disease, military defeat, captives were sacrificed to appease the gods. The remains found at Mound 72 suggest that on rare, significant occasions, the sacrifice was massive. Life revolved around the ceremonial calendar. 4 major ceremonies per year, aligned with the solstices and equinoxes. The spring equinox, planting ceremony, asking the sun to return and bring warmth. Summer solstice, thanking the sun for growth. Fall equinox, harvest ceremony, celebrating survival. Winter solstice, the most important, the day the sun stops moving south and begins its return. If the sun didn't return, the world would end. So the chief priest performed elaborate rituals atop Monk's Mound, commanding the sun to return. And every year, like clockwork, it did. The people believed he had that power. The most important annual event was the green corn ceremony. This happened in late summer when the corn first ripened. For several days, the entire city participated. Fasting, purification rituals, dancing, feasting. Old fires were extinguished, new ones relit by the chief priest, using a ceremonial drill. Old grudges were forgiven, debts erased. This was the new year. A chance to start fresh. And the message was clear. The chief has maintained cosmic order for another year. The sun has blessed us with food. Below the paramount chief were the priests. These weren't just religious figures. They were scientists. They tracked the stars, calculated the seasons, maintained Woodhenge. They knew the medicinal properties of hundreds of plants. They performed surgery. Archaeologists have found skulls with evidence of successful trepanation, drilling holes in skulls to relieve pressure. They preserved oral histories, passing down knowledge through generations. And they controlled access to the divine. Want to communicate with the spirits? You go through a priest. Want to interpret a dream or omen? Priest. Want to know if this is a good day to go to war? Priest. Knowledge was power. And the priests guarded that knowledge jealously.
Here's a question nobody likes to ask about ancient civilizations. How did Cahokia get so powerful? The answer isn't pretty. Around 1175 CE, something changed at Cahokia. The elite decided they needed protection. Massive protection. They built a wooden palisade wall around the central city core, 12 feet high, made from 20,000 logs, each one a foot thick, watchtowers every 70 feet. This wall enclosed 200 acres, the Grand Plaza, Monk's Mound, the elite residential area. You don't build a wall like that unless you're afraid, or unless you've made a lot of enemies. Archaeologists have found evidence of widespread violence throughout the Mississippian period. Skeletons with embedded arrow points, mass graves of individuals with cranial fractures from war clubs, fortified villages with defensive ditches and palisades, and burned settlements, entire towns put to the torch. This wasn't small-scale raiding. This was organized warfare.
Between 900 and 1200 CE, Cahokia's influence spread across the Mississippian world. How? Trade, cultural influence, religion, and conquest. Smaller chiefdoms either allied with Cahokia or got absorbed. The archaeological evidence suggests a pattern. Cahokia would establish a satellite community nearby, maybe 50 miles away. They'd send elite families to govern, spread their religious beliefs, integrate the local population into the trade network. If the locals resisted, violence. Mississippian warriors were formidable. Their primary weapon, the bow and arrow. By 1000 CE, bow technology had become incredibly sophisticated. Arrows with razor-sharp stone points that could pierce through wooden armor. Close combat, war clubs. Some made from stone, others from wood with embedded stone blades or copper spikes. A single blow could shatter a skull. And they used atolados, spear throwers that could launch a 6-foot dart with enough force to punch through a human body at 50 yards. Being a warrior was a path to power. If you were born a commoner, you were likely stuck as a commoner, unless you proved yourself in battle. Capture an enemy warrior, you gain status. Kill an enemy chief, you become elite. Warriors wore distinctive regalia, copper breastplates, shell gorgets depicting falcon warriors, elaborate tattoos showing their kills, and they were feared. Spanish explorers in the 1500s, 300 years after Cahokia declined, still encountered Mississippian warriors. Their accounts describe fighters so skilled, so fearless, that Spanish soldiers with metal armor and guns struggled against them. Here's where it gets brutal. At several Mississippian sites, archaeologists have found trophy skulls, human skulls that were defleshed, polished, and disprayed. Some have holes drilled through them, likely to hang them as trophies. These weren't accidental deaths or burials. These were trophies. Evidence that taking heads from defeated enemies was part of warfare. The message? This is what happens when you oppose us. Cahokia didn't directly control all of the Mississippian world. That would have been impossible. Instead, they used a tributary system. Smaller chiefdoms maintained their own leaders, their own governance. But they paid tribute to Cahokia. Food, labor, luxury goods. And in return, Cahokia provided protection, access to the trade network, religious legitimacy. If you rebelled, Cahokia had the warriors to crush you. But here's the thing about empires. They're expensive. Maintaining thousands of warriors costs food. Building and rebuilding palisade walls costs labor. Keeping tributary chieftains in line costs resources. And by 1200 CE, Cahokia was starting to strain under the weight.
By 1200 CE, Cahokia was at its absolute peak. 20,000 people, monumental architecture, control over a trading empire. And then it started to collapse. By 1350 CE, the population had dropped to just a few thousand. By 1400 CE, Cahokia was abandoned, empty, silent. The greatest city in North America, gone. This is the question that haunts archaeologists. How does a civilization this powerful just vanish? The truth? It wasn't one thing. It was everything going wrong at once. First, the environment. Remember, Cahokia needed to feed 20,000 people. That requires massive amounts of farmland. By 1150 CE, they'd cleared thousands of acres of forest for agriculture. But deforestation causes problems. Soil erosion, the land loses nutrients.
The Mississippi River started flooding more severely. Without tree roots to hold the soil, the riverbanks collapsed. And then there's climate. Around 1200 CE, a prolonged drought hit the Midwest, the same drought that devastated the ancestral Puebloans in the Southwest and led to the abandonment of Mesa Verde. Crops fell, people starved. And when people are starving, they start questioning whether their chief really can control the sun. Second, politics. The paramount chief's power was based on one thing: cosmic legitimacy. I maintain balance, I command the sun, I bring the harvest. But when the harvest fails, that legitimacy crumbles. Archaeological evidence suggests increasing violence within Cahokia itself during the decline. More fortifications, more evidence of internal conflict. Rival factions fighting for control? Probably. The elite consuming themselves with political infighting while the city burned? Almost certainly. Third, disease. When you pack 20,000 people into a relatively small area with limited sanitation, disease spreads fast. Human remains from later Cahokia show increased signs of malnutrition and disease. Tuberculosis, parasitic infections, dental problems indicating poor nutrition. And when a significant portion of your population is sick, you can't farm efficiently. You can't maintain the mounds. You can't defend your territory. The whole system starts to break down. Fourth, they depleted their resources. To build Monk's Mound alone, they needed thousands of trees for support posts in construction. The palisade wall, 20,000 logs, and it had to be rebuilt multiple times. Every house needed wooden poles and thatching. By 1200 CE, they'd cut down virtually every large tree within miles of the city. That means you're walking further to get construction materials, further to get firewood for winter, further to find game for hunting. It's exhausting, inefficient, and eventually unsustainable. So what did people do? They left. Not all at once. This wasn't a sudden evacuation. It was a gradual bleeding away. First, the farmers on the outskirts. Why stay when you can farm better land elsewhere? Then the craftsmen. Why make goods for a shrinking market? Then the warriors. Why defend a dying city? And finally, the elite themselves. By 1350 CE, even the paramount chief's lineage had abandoned Monk's Mound. The Mississippian culture didn't end. It dispersed. The people spread out across the Mississippi Valley. Some moved south and became the ancestors of the Natchez people. Some moved east and merged with southeastern tribes. Some moved west toward the Arkansas River Valley. The religious beliefs, the artistic traditions, the social structures, they continued. Just smaller, decentralized. Cahokia was gone, but the Mississippian culture lived on for another 200 years in other forms. Imagine walking through Cahokia in 1400 CE. The Grand Plaza, once packed with thousands, is now overgrown with grass. The palisade walls are rotting, collapsing inward. Monk's Mound still stands, massive, eternal. But the temple on top? Abandoned. The wooden posts of Woodhenge? Falling down, one by one. The houses are empty, roofs caved in, reclaimed by nature. And there's no sound, no drums, no ceremonies, no voices, just wind. Within a century, trees would grow over everything. Within 2 centuries, the mounds would look like natural hills. And when French explorers arrived in the 1600s, They had no idea a city had ever been there.
For 400 years, Cahokia was forgotten. French traders set up a monastery on top of Monk's Mound in the 1700s, not realizing they were building on ancient ruins. That's how the mound got its name, Monk's Mound, named after French monks who had no idea what they were standing on. It wasn't until the 1800s that Americans started asking questions. Why are these weird hills near St. Louis? Did Native Americans build these? And some people, racist scholars of the time, insisted that indigenous peoples couldn't have built something this sophisticated. They invented wild theories. A lost race of mound builders from Europe or the Middle East. Vikings, Phoenicians, even ancient Israelites. Anything to avoid giving credit to Native Americans. It was disgusting and completely wrong. Real archaeology began in the early 1900s. Warren K. Moorhead conducted the first systematic excavations in 1922 to 1927. What he found shocked the academic world. This wasn't some small village. This was a city, comparable to cities in Mesoamerica. Evidence of social hierarchy, organized labor, monumental architecture. And it was older than anyone thought, predating European contact by hundreds of years. Fast forward to the 1960s, the state of Illinois decides to build Interstate 5570 right through the heart of ancient Cahokia. Archaeologists panicked. If that highway got built, it would destroy irreplaceable archaeological sites. So they launched emergency excavations. That's when they found Woodhenge, Mound 72 with the mass burials, evidence of the palisade walls. The highway still got built. But thanks to those excavations, we learned more about Cahokia in those few years than in the previous century. In 1982, Cahokia Mounds was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of only 24 in the United States. Put in the same category as the Grand Canyon, the Statue of Liberty, Yellowstone. The recognition was long overdue. This wasn't just an archaeological site. This was proof that North America had complex civilizations long before Europeans arrived. Today, about 2,200 acres are protected as Cahokia Mounds State Historic Site. But here's the heartbreaking part. That's only about 10% of the original city. The rest? Destroyed. Plowed under for farms, paved over for highways and suburbs, quarried for fill dirt. Of the original 120 mounds, only 80 remain. Entire neighborhoods wiped out before archaeologists could study them. We'll never know the full story of Cahokia. Too much has been lost forever. But what is preserved is extraordinary. The Cahokia Mounds Museum and Interpretive Center opened in 1989. You can walk through reconstructions of ancient houses, see artifacts, copper, shells, stone tools that traveled hundreds of miles to get here. Watch a film that brings the city to life. And then you can climb Monk's Mound. All 156 steps to the top. Stand where the paramount chief once stood. Look out over what remains of the Grand Plaza. And imagine 20,000 people below you. Here's something important. Cahokia's descendants are still here. The Osage Nation, the Cahokia tribe, the Peoria tribe, many others. These tribes maintain oral traditions that connect them to this place. And increasingly, they're being included in how Cahokia is interpreted and presented. For too long, archaeologists and historians treated Cahokia as a dead civilization. It's not dead. The people and their descendants are still here, and they're reclaiming their history. Cahokia teaches us something crucial. North America before European contact wasn't empty wilderness. It wasn't scattered tribes living simple lives.
It was home to sophisticated civilizations, cities, governments, trade networks, science, art, religion. Cahokia alone had a population larger than London in 1200 CE. The Mississippian culture influenced an area of 1 million square miles. This was a superpower. And yet, most Americans have never heard of it. That needs to change.
So what's the legacy of Cahokia? What does it mean for us today? First, it's a reminder of impermanence. This civilization lasted 500 years, built monuments that still stand today, and yet it fell. Environmental collapse, political instability, resource depletion, disease. Sound familiar? Cahokia is a warning. Even the most powerful civilizations, if they don't manage their resources, if they don't adapt to environmental change, if they let inequality spiral out of control, they collapse. But it's also a story about people. Real people who lived, loved, struggled, and survived. The farmer who woke up before dawn to tend their fields. The trader who walked 600 miles carrying copper. The mother who lost her daughter to sacrifice and had no power to stop it. The chief who stood atop Monk's Mound believing he controlled the sun and watched helplessly as his world crumbled. These were humans, as complex as us, as intelligent as us, as capable as us. They just lived in a different time. For too long, the story of the Americas was told like this. Nothing was here before Europeans arrived, just wilderness and primitive tribes. That's a lie. And it's a lie that was used to justify genocide, colonization, and cultural erasure. The truth? North America was home to millions of people, sophisticated societies, advanced agriculture, complex governments, cities like Cahokia that rivaled anything in Europe or Asia. And that civilization was destroyed, not because indigenous peoples were inferior, but because European diseases, smallpox, measles, influenza, killed up to 90% of the population. By the time English settlers arrived in Jamestown in 1607, most of the great Mississippian cities were already abandoned. The survivors had scattered, rebuilt, adapted, but the cities, the monuments, reclaim us by forest. If you drive through the Midwest or Southeast today, you'll pass dozens of ancient mounds. Most people don't even notice them. They look like hills, but they're not hills. They're pyramids, built by hand, by thousands of people over centuries. And they're still here. Monk's Mound, Etowah Mounds in Georgia, Spiro Mounds in Oklahoma, Moundville in Alabama, Poverty Point in Louisiana, silent monuments to a civilization most Americans know nothing about. So here's what I want you to take away from this. The next time someone tells you that Native Americans were primitive or uncivilized, tell them about Cahokia. Tell them about the city of 20,000 people. Tell them about Monk's Mound, the largest earthwork in North America. Tell them about Woodhenge, an astronomical observatory as sophisticated as Stonehenge. Tell them about the trade network that spanned 1 million square miles. Tell them about the art, the science, the architecture, the government. And tell them that this civilization existed. It was real, and it deserves to be remembered. Imagine standing at the base of Monk's Mound at sunrise, the same sunrise that the Mississippian people watched for 500 years, the same sun they worshipped, the same sun they believed their chief controlled. The mound is silent now, but if you listen closely, you can almost hear the drums, the voices of 20,000 people, the footsteps of the traders, the chants of the priests, the laughter of children playing Chunkey in the Grand Plaza. They're gone. But their story lives on. And it's our responsibility to tell it. This was Cahokia.
the greatest city you've never heard of, the capital of a civilization that changed North America forever. Now you know.
Cahokia Mound's State Historic Site is open to the public year-round. The Interpretive Center features artifacts, exhibits, and a film about the ancient city. For more information, visit cahokiamounds.org. Special acknowledgement to the Osage Nation, Cahokia Tribe, Peoria Tribe, and other indigenous nations whose ancestors built this remarkable city.